I'm Chantal Wong.
And I'm Inti Guerrero.
And we are the co-curators of Mythmakers Spectrosynthesis III, a contemporary art exhibition exploring LGBTQ themes, co-presented by Tue-Sun Contemporary and Sun Pride Foundation. We're currently standing in front of Gallery 1 that holds Chapter 1, Queer Mythologies, and to my left is the second chapter, Body Politics. We'll take you later on to the third floor that contains Chapter 3, Queer Futurities.
So come with us to the first chapter called Queer Mythologies, where there are artists from different parts of Asia and its diasporas approach different ways of thinking how storytelling has been mythologized throughout history, whether looking at same-sex love stories and romance that has been mythologized by societies, or artists that are in themselves interested in mythological creatures, belief systems, spiritual world. The artist that you see here, 𝘔𝘺𝘵𝘩, brings three stories that existed in real life. These people did exist. There are archives that tell us about their same-sex love story between the people that are represented in this paper-cut imagery, and they have been mythologized as queer narratives that happened centuries back before any categorization of LGBTQ even existed. They are stories about antiquity of China, of a queer imagery that we celebrate in this exhibition.
And in this section, we're expanding the notion of what mythologies means by also highlighting celebrity culture. So to my left, you have a video by Ellen Pao on the renowned love story across Chinese-speaking Asia of 𝘔𝘱𝘕 and 𝘔𝘠𝘕, two very important and famous Cantonese opera singers who, through mediatization, became part of every household's language and vocabulary. So you'd see them on television and hear them on the radio. And so this became part of a way that queer language penetrated families and family intimate spaces. To my right, you have prints and a video by 𝘔𝘔𝘕 exploring a very long-term project that they've been working on, bringing together archival material, research, oral interviews, oral histories about a really important theater movement of all-female theater opera troupes in South Korea during the 1950s and 60s. It's kind of a dying art form now and has been systematically omitted from the larger narrative of theater in South Korea. And so by reviving this material and retelling their stories, she's trying to place this history and these figures and this form of opera into a contemporary context.
In the work of 𝘔𝘺𝘕, the artist brings us another way of thinking mythologies. She creates a goddess figure through this impeccable and gorgeous statuesque installation where she represents a possible goddess deity to best represent the experience of queer and trans people that she honors in this installation, made out of weaving practices that have different forms of materiality that are connected to vernacular street culture. In the exhibition, there's also works that are coming from different eras, such as the 1940s, in the work of Alfonso Osorio, a Filipino artist who did most of his work in New York in the 1930s, throughout the 1950s. His mythologized or remythologizing our world is connected to queer perspective towards his Catholic upbringing and how he speaks to different ways in which the Catholic Church has shamed the body historically. The work is in dialogue with an installation by Amy Lin and Enzo Camacho, two artists who have done an incredible research on one of the most iconic works of Alfonso Osorio called The Angry Christ.
Behind me are works by Chitra Ganesh, who has been, again, for over a decade, been creating new interpretations of very popular Hindu and South Asian mythologies and folklore. She uses print, video, painting, but also really important here are her comic book reinterpretations of the Amar Chitra Katha, which is a very popular comic book series that popularizes Hindu mythologies for students, young people, for families. And here she's reinterpreting from a queer and feminist lens, and really highlighting the stories from the female protagonist's perspective.
In this room, queer mythologies are further explored by artists that are looking into portraiture as a medium where gender identity can be further explored and expanded. In the work of Patrick 𝘔𝘺𝘵𝘩, he uses portraiture and self-portraiture, like the work that you see behind me, as a way to identify with a female character. He, as a male artist of Chinese descent in Malaysia in the 1950s, represents himself in this painting as a Malay woman, possibly a Malay woman living in a pre-British colonial time or even pre-Islamic time, a time connected to animism and indigenous spirituality. This is just a glimpse of the Queer Mythologies chapter, which gathers different perspectives on creation stories, on goddesses, on love stories that have been mythologized throughout history, that are seen through the perspective of queer artists and queer narratives from Asia and its diasporas. Welcome to Chapter 2. We've named this chapter Body Politics, looking at different histories and narratives around criminalization and forms of shaming the body, which is very connected to the struggles and histories of the LGBTQ community. The thematics on criminalization is at the same time connected to the memory of the space, 𝘔𝘺𝘺 being part of the compound of the prison, the former prison that Tue-Sun used to be. The work that you see to my left is one of the many works that deal with forms of and histories of criminalization, such as Joseph Ng, who in 1994 did a work that reacted and protested against the raiding of a group of gay men at the time who were not only shamed publicly through media, but also criminalized and penalized, punished by caning, something that changed in Singapore quite recently. The chapter not only looks at these histories, but also wants to present ways in which the community also found ways to escape that repression and escape those forms of criminalization. And one of the forms that is very evident specifically with the gay male community is the acts of cruising, the culture of cruising, which the artists that deal with the subject in the show look or approach it in a different way. 𝘔𝘺𝘵𝘠 Liang looks at it in relation to Kowloon Park, a site of encounter for the community, but also artists that we will look at later throughout this visitation. In another part of this room, we gathered artists that not only were struggling with the repressions in relation to their sexuality, but also the racial politics of the place where they were living. Both Yao Qing, Chen Guangqi, and Martin Wong were crucial artists of a generation in New York whose life experiences created different types of medium and different types of practices. Yao Qing, an artist from Hong Kong who was in New York in the 80s. Chen Guangqi, who was very active since the late 70s, doing iconic work, or Martin Wong, whose work has also a deep connection with the subject of prison incarceration, specifically the racialized incarceration in the US, since many Latino and Black men are disproportionately imprisoned, which is a subject that he continued throughout his painting. The prison physically is manifested by the work of Julia Chang. She has recreated a visitation of a prison where families and loved ones get to be connected to their imprisoned relative, and the artist creates this platform to show us 10 stories of real people in history that were imprisoned due to their sexual behavior. The idea of creating this almost medicalized relationship to sexuality, something that is brought constantly in many of the videos that are presented here, which are in some cases queer, but go beyond that. It is a work that is shown for the first time in Hong Kong. The chapter continues with other forms of cruising and voyeurism. The voyeuristic gaze is something that will manifest throughout this chapter, again, as a form of owning public space, as we've mentioned, in the context of shaming and criminalization. There are a few ways of being in the world and taking part of public space of the public sphere. And that's why there's many works in which that will manifest, not only through physical space, but also looking at ideas of publicness by seeing how artists use publications as a way to, through magazines, manifest their identity, given that in the era before the internet, the publishing material was the way to create community and become part of a certain public sphere that they were once denied from.
So now we're in the third floor, in chapter 3, Queer Futurities. As you'll see that the space is black, is obscure, reminiscent of black box theaters or of rave clubs. The darkness is meant to obscure people and give anonymity and create a safe space for one to, at some level, disappear. And with that, you have the potential of reinvention, of escaping, and just forgetting about your self-consciousness, but maybe allowing yourself to reimagine the potential of your being is and who you can actually be. So behind me is Bruno Ju's work. And these are all instruments and objects that he can find at home. And they look like medical instruments, but upon closer look, you'll see that they're nail files and they're hair clips and they're combs. And at the center, you'll discover that they're soaps, but for Bruno, these are soap babies. Bruno encountered them in a grocery store when he was shopping and found that these soaps actually look like babies, and he thought it was very funny to be able to birth his own babies. There's obviously a limitation to who can and cannot give birth, but what if one has desire and fantasy of birthing something? So for Bruno, in 2019, Constanza Eleganza were born when he came across them at the grocery store. At the same time, he pairs it with objects, like I said, that are found from his own home or at the drugstore. And with these objects, you could just gently start to mold and shape these babies. But at the same time, as you mold and shape too much, like surgery, and if you were to recreate your own body, like we can nowadays, the babies start to disappear because they're a delicate material, they're soap. So this is negotiation of the desire and the fantasy of creation, but also the disappearance of the object. The next work is by 𝘔𝘺𝘬. And you'll see that it looks like if you were to get up close to a microscope, the cells morphing on the plate. Upon closer look, you'll see that there are these light sensors. They look like spiders. And so these images and this light is constantly responding to the light that's coming from the LED. So the image is never twice the same. And this is the morphing of the image according to light is inspired by Octavia Butler's science fiction series, in which the characters and the beings inside the novel, their cells and their skin evolve according to their environments. There is an evolution according to the space, to light, to air, but at the same time it's also evolving according to interspecies relationships and intimacy. So again, what if we were more than the limits of our physical being, but we were constantly, our cells were evolving according to our environments? Another work that explores the limitation of organs coming together and the frontiers of our body is Jess Fan's work. So this is an enlarged version of biological toys that in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s were very popular in schools to teach body parts and female body organs. So if you disassemble, these are actually meant to be female body organ templates, which you would assemble to teach about the female body. However, when you're actually expanded like that, it also enables a new potentiality of reassembling differently, but also shows the absurdity of these parts being separate and what it means to assemble something in a definite way according to social norms. Finally, in this gallery, you have the work of Josh Serafin. The work's title is Cosmological Gangbang, Void. And although when we think about gangbang being something extremely violent, in this instance, we're actually talking about a ritualistic gangbang of energies brought together by gods and goddesses. So the gangbang is a procreation ritual of dance and of coming together of queer bodies to birth a new energy. And the new energy is void. And void is emptiness and darkness, but from emptiness and darkness, like in this space, anything can be birthed. And there's new potentialities. And Josh's work, along with the collaborators, references belief system and cosmological systems in Philippines that predate colonialism, in which shamans, a group of people that they call babelans, were often third-gendered people or people with gender neutrality and gender fluidity, which played very important social roles within their communities and societies. And here again, it is taking their spiritual powers to retell the story and enable a new birthing of their role in society. Josh says the queers are the shamans of tomorrow, and through queerness, we're able to transcend the limitations of our thought, our cosmology, our belief systems, and even our own bodies. As was mentioned before, within this exhibition, there are a number of elements that are about music and clubbing, because within recent history, clubs provided safe spaces for queer communities to gather in extremely homophobic environments and within society. This installation, it was a new commission for this exhibition specifically. This one is by Samson Young, titled PP. PP is a tender nickname for a really important club that opened in 1991. It was called Propaganda. And 1991 was the year that homosexual acts was decriminalized in Hong Kong. Propaganda was actually not far from the Central Police Station. And for over 20 years, it became one of the pillars as a safe gathering space for the queer community of Hong Kong. So if we walk forward, you'll see that it's filled with mirrored hallways. And this is a design inspired by the original Propaganda hallway corridors. And here you actually have a sculpture that is made up of a torso at the top and a reversed China bank. And the original Propaganda was really inspired by Art Deco architecture and design, interior design. One of the main parts of this installation is a stack of subwoofers which are behind this wall, which creates the feeling of a bass throughout the entire of the third floor. So the bass is the feeling that you feel when you're in a club and you feel the vibrations throughout your body thumping. It's also the same feeling that you get when you're standing in front of a club, feeling the bass as you're queuing to get into the club. And Samson really wanted to reflect that sense of anticipation and sense of release that one feels when one is in a space like that, a space that promises freedom and self-expression and community. The installation continues into this room where the spotlight will have a play with the bass frequencies, and they will kind of have a choreography together. So they're meant to move throughout the space, and one feels frequency and light in different parts of the space. If one looks up, one will also see that there's a light installation that reflects the original interior design and lighting effects of propaganda. The rest of this space is with works that touch on bondage and sexual desire and sexual fulfillment. If bondage and BDSM was another form of spiritual experience, which some people describe it as being, then we can think of the connection between spirituality, mythology, and transcendence experience and outer body experiences that sexuality does provide. And same with clubbing experiences. And now let's take a look at a new commission by 𝘔𝘺𝘵𝘩.
The work of 𝘔𝘔𝘺𝘆 is a surrealist narrative that has different references that the artist puts together that are based on the research that she did on the stories of different LGBTQ people that she wanted to create some kind of imagery of their own life and struggle in indirect way. It is all involving around the encounter of one of the characters with a crystal object that comes to the shores, brought by the sea in an almost mythological way. And the artist continues an exploration within the film on how these objects appear and are activated by the different actors that she worked with. 𝘔𝘺𝘆's work is one of the 5 commissioned works that were made specifically for this exhibition in connection to the different subjects that the 3 chapters explore. The other artists are Samson Young from Hong Kong as well, 𝘚𝘱𝘦𝘤𝘵, who is based in Beijing, 𝘔𝘔𝘦𝘵𝘰𝘴, who is Canadian Chinese living in London, and Josh Serafin from the Philippines, who made this fantastic dance video performance work. They are works that were made thought specifically for the narratives of the 3 chapters that we just walked you through. There is another collaboration that we've done with QRL.
And that takes place on the 2nd floor at the Artist Book Library. QRL has been gathering zines and printed material on the queer community across Asia, and particularly in Hong Kong, for a while now, and we're very lucky to be partnering with them to bring to our audiences a presentation on this printed matter, and also collaborating with them on the publication.
The show runs until April 10. We invite you to experience all of these 3 chapters and all of the 100 works made by the more than 60 artists that are gathered in Mythmakers.